It's the 1st of August in my Zone 5 garden, and the garden's moving along great. We've actually had more rain this year than ever. And that does two things. The plants love it, because I normally don't water too much, so at least they're getting enough water this year. But the weeds, boy, they really love it, and we're just inundated with weeds this year. What I'd like to do in this video is talk about general garden maintenance. I'm going to take you around the garden, show you various things that need to be done, explain how to do them. It'll give you an opportunity to see a lot of my favorite plants, and it'll give me an opportunity to explain how I take care of those plants. Now behind me here is one of my favorites. It's the butterfly bush. Now in warmer climates, this plant can be quite weedy. But in Zone 5, it really doesn't spread too much, and it isn't an issue here. When this plant's flowering, it's always covered with butterflies, but it also has a lot of hummingbird moths on it. Now what I like to do with this plant is keep an eye on the flowers. Once a flower stem is finished blooming, I like to cut it off. And the reason for that is the more I cut these off and prevent it from going to seed, the more flowers I get. The plant seems to make new buds right up until frost. So by deadheading this plant, I get a longer bloom period. Now that's not true of all plants. So you kind of have to get to know each one of your plants to see if deadheading makes a difference. But if nothing else, deadheading makes the garden look a little better, prevents the plant making seeds, and as you well know, making seeds is an energy-intensive process for the plant. You'll get bigger plants and more flowers next year if you deadhead. And how do I deadhead? I just use a pruner and go around and cut them off. This is one of my favorite hostas. Some people cut these flower spikes off just as they're developing, before they even show above the leaves. And they do that because they think the flowers destroy the look of the plant. Personally, I really like the flowers, so I leave them on until they're finished. Now once the flowering is finished, then I might come along and cut the stems off. Just makes the plant look a little better. Now when it comes to hostas, there's another thing I look for. I have a close look at the flower stem and see what happens when the flowers are finished. On this one, they're just falling off, and I don't see any seed pods on here. Some hostas seem to be sterile and they don't make seed pods, so there's really no benefit to the plant to cut these stems off. But that's not true of all hostas. Let's have a look at another one. This is hosta Francis Williams. It's a nice large hosta, and its flowering is a little bit ahead of the other one we just looked at. The flowers are finished, and you can see that the stems are covered in seed pod. When you see this on a plant, it's a really good idea to cut it off, unless you want those seeds. The problem with leaving the seeds on here is they're drawing energy away from the plant, and it's not growing quite as well. The second problem is, and I know this from experience, these seeds will start seeding around and you'll get little hostas everywhere. Now that sounds like a great thing. You want more hostas. Now remember, the seedlings from a plant like this won't look like the parents. And in fact, most of the seedlings from hosta are going to be just green hosta. They're nothing really special. If you want more plants, you're better off dividing this one and not growing them from seed. So I like to take these off. Easiest thing you can do is just cut the stem off. Or if you're in the garden and you forgot your pruners, just go like that. This is one of my favorite trees. It's a redbud, and I think they're great for gardens because they don't grow too large and they fit in most backyards. You can also prune them to be fairly open so you can grow lots of shade plants underneath. They do have one problem. The crotches between the branch and the main trunk are very weak, and many times they'll snap. And that's what happened with this one. We had a rain a couple days ago, and I guess the rain was just too heavy for the branch. It bent it down, snapped it right here. The branch used to be up like this, and now it's hanging down like this. Now the rule for pruning is you should do most of your pruning in late winter, early spring. But this is an exception. When you see damage like this, you really should prune it right away. The tree is trying to seal this off, and the sooner you make the final cut, the easier it is on the plant. Open damage like this also is a good way for diseases to get into the plant. So take care of that today and don't worry about the pruning rule. Do it right away. Now, as I'm standing here, I noticed something that's very unique about redbuds. They will actually flower on the trunk of the tree. And for some reason this year, we got a lot of seed pods on the plant. And we even have seed pods right on the trunk here. There's very few plants will do that. Now, if you want to grow more redbuds, you can do a couple things. Leave these seed pods on the tree, and they'll make seedlings themselves. Or if you want, wait until late fall and harvest these seeds and grow them yourself. Redbuds are really easy to grow from seed, and I have several other videos to show you everything you need to know about growing any plant from seed. Have a look at my baggie video. It's one of the most popular videos I have. Right underneath this redbud is an unusual plant. It's a Persicaria painter's palette, and it's doing really well here. It's got a nice big clump, and it's even made a small baby off to the side. I used to grow this plant in more sun, and it just didn't do well. I had it for 3 or 4 years there. It wouldn't grow. When I have a plant that's not doing well, I do one of two things. Either I throw it out because I've given up on the plant, or more likely, I'll move it somewhere completely different. More moisture, less light, more light. I'll look at the plant and try and figure out where it might like to grow. And many times I find that once I move it into this other location, it does just fine. This plant seems to really enjoy a bit more shade and a little more moisture. And it's just lovely in this spot. This is one of my favorite plant combinations. I love the way the two colors complement each other. The plant on the left is the stinking hellebore. And I love this hellebore more than the normal type of hellebores. It looks like this all year long. Even in winter when I come out here, you'll still have these leaves here. But it's just a beautiful plant. And it's great beside larger hostas. Or in this case, it's beside a yellow Japanese forest grass. Now the hellebore really doesn't need any maintenance. I don't do anything to this plant all year long. The plant on the right does get a little more attention. I found that this plant does not like to dry out. So if we do have a dry spell, it does get a little extra water, and then it grows much stronger and larger. A couple years ago, I had problems with lawn grass growing in it. And once you get lawn grass in a perennial, it's just really hard to get it out. So I ended up taking this clump and taking a large parts of it out just to get rid of that grass, and I think I managed to get it all out. Now it's regrowing, and it looks pretty good this year, but a couple years ago this clump was even larger and fuller, and that's what I'm working towards now. So I'm going to keep an eye on this and make sure that I don't get any more weeds started inside of it. Other than that, it really needs no care at all. This small tree here is Prunus marianjarvi. You probably won't find it in your local nursery. It's pretty hard to find. A friend of mine brought this back from China, and it has been propagated here in Ontario, but it's not wildly distributed. What I'm going to tell you about this plant also applies to all your other prunus, all those ornamental cherries and plums that you might have in the garden. And those are quite popular plants. This particular plant is a double grafted plant. So it's grafted at the bottom, like many of the prunus are. But this one also has a graft right here, and you might notice a big clump here. This is the graft union that's growing bigger than either the stem below it or the stem above it. Now, I don't generally like double grafted plants because plants can fail at the graft. If this fails and everything above it dies, the plant's gone. Now it might regrow from the bottom, but that's going to be a completely different plant. That's one of the reasons I don't like grafted plants. So what I have been trying to do is to take cuttings of this plant. I take small cuttings from up here, try to root them. I have a separate video on doing cuttings, and some cuttings are really easy to do, others are quite difficult. And for some reason, I'm having trouble with this one. In that case, what I do is I take cuttings once a month and see if there's that sweet spot where they root more easily. The other problem with a plant like this is that the root system can sucker. And this is a common problem with the prunus as well as all of the crab apples you have in the garden. And this plant has a sucker right down here. As soon as you see those suckers, you have to deal with them. This is the sucker here. Now what you need to do is dig this soil away until you can find the root system that's generating this and cut it as far down as you can. Now I have a separate video to show you how to deal with these root suckers. But what's important is that you keep after them. Don't let these grow, because these things will grow larger than the tree that they're coming from. And these are not desirable trees. I hope you've enjoyed this tour of my garden, and I hope you've learned something about maintaining the garden. Now I showed you specific plants and what I would do for that plant, but most of the ideas in this video apply to all kinds of plants in the garden. I don't have rules for specific plants. I go through the garden and apply the same rules to all kinds of plants. Learn to understand your plant. If it's spreading around, keep it from making seeds. If it's not spreading around, don't deadhead. Why do a job you don't need to? Unless, of course, you think the plant will look much better if you do. Anyways, until next time, I hope you enjoy your garden.